Well, I already reviewed the first feature-length animated movie in Snow White, so I guess I'll just go on to the second one. Pinocchio. So Pinocchio was the second full-length animated movie put out by Walt Disney, and this movie is at the same time better and worse than Snow White. But let's start off with the positives. After Snow White made a whole bunch of money, the first thing Walt Disney did was deposit the check. But the second thing that he did was start up his own school for animation to help his animators get better. And get better they did, because just looking at Pinocchio, you can immediately tell that these animators got a lot more experience, both from what they did on Snow White, but also with what they did in between, especially when it comes to how they animate the men. There are a lot of male characters in this movie, and they move a lot more naturally than the prince did in Snow White. But not only has the overall quality of the character animations improved, but if you watch my review of Snow White, I talked about the multi-plane camera and what a great innovation that was for the art of animation. And in Pinocchio, they use it so much more than they did in Snow White. In Snow White, they used it for a few establishing shots and closing shots, to give that sense of depth and suck you into the world. But in Pinocchio, they use it so much more often. They use it for the establishing shots, and there's this one really long establishing shot of the village, and it looks like they used just about every plane of glass that the multi-plane camera could handle. And to pull it off as smoothly as they did is no small feat. And you get a sense that in Pinocchio, they finally mastered how to use the multi-plane camera and everything that it can do, whereas before it was still in the experimental phase. But probably the best thing that this upgrade of animation in Pinocchio gave us was how diverse the story could be. Pinocchio is not a very straightforward fairy tale. There's a lot of twists and turns and different adventures that they go on, and you see a variety of different locations, from Pleasure Island to the puppet show to the belly of a whale. And as much as I love that one multi-plane long shot of the village, my favorite animation sequence in Pinocchio is that of Monstro the whale when he's chasing Pinocchio and Geppetto over the high seas. The way the water is animated in this is so beautiful. It almost looks like an impressionistic painting, where you don't see every drop of water or every wave, but there's a lot of streaks and white lines where you see these very thick brushstrokes of paint that resemble the water and the foam. And even though you don't get the most detail, it does a great job of adding a sense of speed and velocity to this chase sequence. And it's crazy how good it looks, because they hadn't really animated water before and were kind of making it up as they went along. And this impressionistic style of the water wasn't made so much as a choice, but more out of necessity, because they really didn't want to have to animate every single one of those waves on screen. But the innovations don't stop there. This movie also did some things with rotoscoping. Now, rotoscoping isn't a new thing to this movie. Snow White did it to an extent, and it was pretty common practice at this point. But what Pinocchio did a little different was that when it came to Stromboli's gypsy cart, they made a little maquette that was also common practice for reference and lighting and proportion. But what they did with that cart was that they actually rotoscoped the cart so that they could get realistic movement too, and it saved the animators a lot of hassle. So yeah, if you're looking at the animation quality of Pinocchio compared to Snow White, Pinocchio is another giant leap forward for the art of animation. But just because you innovate with animation and push it forward in a big way doesn't make the whole movie good. But it does help to have some of the most memorable songs from Disney's golden age in your movie, and it's safe to say that Pinocchio has that. Seriously, every song from Pinocchio is ingrained into your brain and will not go away anytime soon. From I've Got No Strings on Me to Give a Little Whistle to An Actor's Life for Me to Little Wooden Head, even When You Wish Upon a Star, that was so good that Disney turned it into the anthem for the whole company and still plays over the Disney logo even to this day. But I guess it helps when it's sung by the most likable character Disney created in that era, Jiminy Cricket. And yeah, I know a lot of people nowadays aren't huge Jiminy Cricket fans. A lot of people find him annoying or too upbeat and happy-go-lucky all the time. But if you watch Pinocchio again, that's not what Jiminy Cricket's personality was at all. He was not some happy-go-lucky guy that Fun and Fancy Free would make you think. He was a cynical, sarcastic, down-on-his-luck cricket that somehow got wrapped up into becoming this puppet's conscience. And no matter how insulting it might be, Jiminy always did speak the truth to Pinocchio, and he gets quite a few good lines. But even though Pinocchio does have all these good things in it, I'm not the biggest fan of Pinocchio. It's not one of my favorite Disney movies. It's probably not even in my top 20. And that's because the actual story of Pinocchio isn't the most cohesive even for a fairy tale. And if you think I'm gonna start nitpicking Pinocchio because some animals talk and some don't, and there's a really important plot point of people turning into animals and they can't talk anymore, all of that I just chalk up to fairy tale logic, and it's just part of the bizarre rules of this world. And that much doesn't really bother me so much as the actual narrative kind of jumps around. It's not really one cohesive story. It feels more like a series of isolated adventures that are kind of lazily strung along. You start with Pinocchio's origin story by the Blue Fairy and Geppetto wishing upon a star, and all that's handled really well. But then he gets wrapped up in show business with Stromboli's puppet show, and after they escape Stromboli, he's back into trouble again with the coachman going to Pleasure Island. And after he gets out of that scrape, he's looking for his dad who's in the belly of Monstro the Whale, and we have that adventure. And the pattern that I'm starting to see is that Pinocchio gets into trouble, Jiminy Cricket gets him out of it, and then rinse and repeat. And it's important to know that Pinocchio was not a huge success when it came out. Now, part of that could be because of the hilariously disastrous premiere, where you had little people in Pinocchio costumes that got so drunk because they were up there all day long that they stripped naked and started peeing off of the balcony. And if you want to know more about that whole snafu, look it up for yourself. It's hilarious. The more details you get, the funnier it gets. But that aside, part of what I don't think resonated with audiences was, for one, the disjointed narrative that felt like it was on repeat for a lot of it. And two, it had a much darker tone than I think people were expecting from the studio that brought you Snow White. And I'll talk about the darker elements on their own later, but what I think hurts this movie above all else is the lack of connective tissue from one adventure to the next. And I can't help but think if these different segments were animated on their own with the reoccurring characters of Pinocchio and Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket, then we could get a series of shorts that are really entertaining and can get as creative and over the top and weird as they want. And we can see more anthropomorphized animal characters like Honest John and Gideon. I honestly think that they are an underutilized duo of villains in the Disney lore, and I'd like to see them utilized in more creative ways other than just talking to a little boy on the side of the street. And I don't think this next thing hurt the movie when it came out, but it does kind of take me out of the experience personally, and it's the amount of 1940s America that makes its way into this Italian village set sometime in the 1800s. And as much as I do like Jiminy Cricket, he is the first offender of this, and it's just in the way he talks. He uses some 1940s slang from time to time. But where it gets really obvious is with the character of Lampwick and pretty much everything that goes down in Pleasure Island. I mean, in Pleasure Island they had roller coasters and stuff, and that didn't really exist back then, at least not to the complexity that we see here. And you see them playing pool, which was a big deal in the 1940s. People thought it was sinful and corrupting to humanity. But pool wasn't even around in the 1800s. It didn't even really replace billiards as the most popular tabletop ball game until around the 1920s. So yeah, while it is a little nitpicky, just that anachronistic feel does take me out of the movie, especially when I'm trying to watch a fairy tale that's set admittedly in an ambiguous setting, but when they try to bring in all the modern stuff, it just feels a little out of place. And it somehow makes Pinocchio feel a lot more dated than something like Snow White, even though the animation is a lot cleaner. But now let's talk about my favorite aspect of any Golden Age Disney movie: the dark stuff. So a lot of you probably already know this. Pinocchio is a dark story, and it's based off of an even darker source material that makes the animated version look like Barney the Dinosaur by comparison. But even so, Pinocchio definitely has its darker aspects. Now, everybody knows about the donkeys, and yes, that is probably the most terrifying part of Pinocchio, is when you see all the kids turning into donkeys and screaming for their mamas. And it is heartbreaking to see these little boys regret their life decisions, and we never see these boys again. For all we know, they're either dead or toiling at the salt mines or circuses or wherever they're sold to. And all of the villains, from the coachman to Stromboli to Honest John and Gideon, none of them get any kind of comeuppance from their evil deeds. They just get away with it. And I don't know how Disney was able to get away with this, because the Hays Code was in full effect, and it specifically stated that all villainous characters need to be punished in some way by the end of the movie. But I guess because it was animated and it was still this new medium, and there wasn't a whole lot of regulation when it came to Disney movies, I guess they let it slide. But as traumatizing as all the donkey stuff was, seeing the coachman's face right there is prime time Disney nightmare fuel. And going back to the donkeys real quick, the term jackass is thrown around quite a bit in this movie, and it just goes to show that the MPAA, or the censorship of movies, is it's all a joke. Because this movie is rated G, and even though they are using it in the donkey context, this movie has some dark imagery, and I guarantee if this were made today, it would be PG. Can you honestly tell me that Frozen has more objectionable material in it than Pinocchio does? Because I don't think you can. But watching Pinocchio again, I realized there is such a missed opportunity here, specifically with the ending. Now, the climax of Pinocchio has to do with Monster of the Whale, and it's all about Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket trying to save Geppetto from inside the belly of the whale by going into the belly of the whale, lighting a fire in there, and then when he opens his mouth to let the smoke out, they escape. And that's a pretty solid escape plan, good on Pinocchio. But now where do you think he got that idea of fire solving the problem? Now, Pinocchio has not had a great relationship with fire throughout this whole movie. When he was first born, he touched a candle, set his finger on fire, and Geppetto freaked out, which not only introduced Pinocchio to ever-present dangers, but also showed that he is susceptible to fire. But then fire comes up again when Stromboli has him captive, and he threatens Pinocchio to chop him up into firewood. And that's something that Pinocchio very much objects to and wants to get out right away. But now here we are in the belly of a whale, and fire seems to be the only way to get them out of the whale. And where the missed opportunity is for me is that I honestly think that Pinocchio should have burned alive in the belly of that whale. That may sound really dark and sadistic, but narratively I think it would have tied all the previous segments together a lot better. And if you don't want to have the kids leave the theater crying, you can still have the Blue Fairy bring him back to life and make him a real boy at the end because of his sacrifice in the belly of the whale. I mean, Pinocchio does die in the movie as is, after they escape the whale, and he just kind of breaks on some rocks and he's just lying there dead. And the Blue Fairy brings him to life anyway. I just think it would have been a bit more clever if they had burned Pinocchio alive in the fire in the belly of the whale, making his sacrifice be a lot closer related to him sacrificing his life for his father. And I think having that incredibly powerful sacrifice in the belly of the whale would serve as a better justification for redeeming him from all the mistakes that he made throughout the rest of the movie. But I also understand that this change would make it even darker than it already is. But I just see it as going all the way with a concept that you brought up in the beginning of the movie. And that's how I feel about Pinocchio, Walt Disney's second animated masterpiece. And from an animation and technical perspective, it is a masterpiece. But for me, it doesn't really do it for me. I appreciate it for what it is, but from a narrative and character perspective, is this on par with some of the other great Disney movies that have come along? I don't think so, but now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Pinocchio? Do you like it? Did it traumatize you as a kid? Have you come to appreciate it as you've grown up? Whatever you think, comment below. It helps out the channel. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.